The US and Israeli militaries have spent weeks running an intense air campaign over Iran. They've decimated the country's air defenses, leveled surface fleets, and maintained total aerial supremacy. By every conventional metric, they are winning. But at the exact same time, they are actively losing an entirely different conflict. This map zooms in from the broader Middle East down to the Strait of Hormuz, a tight choke point where the shipping lanes are squeezed between harsh, mountainous terrain to a width of barely 54 kilometers. Looking at this data overlay, exactly 1/5 of the entire global supply of oil and natural gas travels through these specific waters. Iran knows it can't shoot down American stealth bombers. Instead, they rely on tens of thousands of cheap, mass-produced weapons, like the Shahed 136 drone. They launch these from flatbed trucks deep in the desert, aiming them directly into the shipping lanes. Sinking Iran's actual navy doesn't solve this problem. Iran doesn't need warships to enforce a blockade. They only need to sporadically fire drones or missiles into the strait to create an atmosphere of severe risk. Once that risk exists, maritime insurance companies refuse to cover commercial vessels, effectively shutting down the route. Without insurance, the merchant fleet simply stops moving. Massive oil tankers end up anchored in safe waters or forced into extreme detours, severing the flow of energy to refineries across Asia and Europe. When the fuel supply drops, the cost of doing business skyrockets globally. Companies pay more for power and transport, and they pass those baseline costs directly to the consumer at the pump and the grocery store. Economists calculate that every $10 increase in a barrel of oil pushes overall inflation up by 1/3%. If the strait remains closed and oil climbs to $140 a barrel, Western economies risk tipping straight into a recession. This turns the U.S. military's mission into an immediate economic rescue operation. If they fail to secure the strait, the global economy suffocates. The most obvious military solution is to shoot down the incoming threats. The U.S. deploys advanced radar networks and interceptor missiles to shield the cargo ships from Iranian drones. But the economics of this strategy are wildly unbalanced. The U.S. military is firing highly sophisticated interceptors that cost millions of dollars apiece just to knock down Iranian drones that cost around $20,000 to build. You quickly hit a hard physical limit. The Pentagon only has a finite supply of advanced munitions, like the THAAD interceptor. In a sustained campaign, the U.S. burns through years of stockpiled missiles in weeks, and the defense industry cannot build replacements fast enough. Going on the offensive to destroy the launchers doesn't work either. Iran's southern coastline stretches for 2,400 kilometers and is packed with rugged caves, bunkers, and tunnels. Finding and destroying every hidden drone launcher from the air is practically impossible. The math favors Iran. The United States will exhaust its multi-billion-dollar missile inventory well before the Islamic Republic runs out of cheap drones or mountain hiding spots. Ultimately, air power alone cannot break the blockade. The next logical option is a limited ground assault to grab a valuable bargaining chip. U.S. forces could target Karg Island, a small landmass off the coast that processes over 90% of Iran's crude oil exports. The plan relies on economic leverage. By capturing the island and severing the regime's primary source of funding, the U.S. hopes to squeeze the Iranian government until they agree to reopen the strait. But this strategy has a fatal geographic flaw. Iran's drone operators don't need the coastline, and they certainly don't need Karg Island. They can easily fire their weapons into the Strait of Hormuz from hundreds of kilometers inland. Worse, capturing Karg Island means heavy combat. If the fighting damages the island's massive oil infrastructure, a huge chunk of the global oil supply is knocked offline permanently. Taking the island fails on both fronts. It risks triggering the exact global price spike the operation was meant to prevent, and it does absolutely nothing to neutralize the weapons actually firing into the strait. If you want to permanently stop the drone attacks, you have to physically occupy the launch sites. That means putting American boots on the ground to secure the interior of the country. Invading Iran requires navigating ancient, unyielding physical barriers. The country is essentially a massive fortress, shielded on all sides by towering, snowy peaks like the Zagros Mountains, which have broken invading armies for millennia. This diagram compares the sheer scale of Iran to America's last major Middle Eastern intervention in Iraq. Iran is roughly 4 times larger, with triple the population. Adjusting troop requirements from 2003, a successful occupation would demand a continuous deployment of over 1 million soldiers. Amassing 1 million troops would require reinstating the military draft, a move so politically toxic it is practically impossible. A full-scale land invasion to clear the strait would dwarf the Vietnam War in both scale and cost. The United States has exhausted its options. Overwhelming air superiority cannot win a war of attrition. Seizing coastal assets backfires, and a full-scale invasion is off the table entirely. The administration is left trapped between 3 terrible choices. They can negotiate and concede to Iranian demands, do nothing and watch a global recession destroy the domestic economy, or attempt a massive escalatory ground war. For decades, the assumption has been that enough defense spending and advanced stealth technology could overcome any adversary. But a fleet of 5th-generation fighters has no answer for a localized blockade enforced by cheap drones. The Strait of Hormuz proves a harsh reality. No matter how large the military budget or how sophisticated the weaponry, you cannot simply bomb your way past the physical limitations of geography.